Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome back to our English. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. We had beautiful warm weather. Hey, Wilda. So I hope you made the most of the weekend. You enjoyed it. You got out. You did something interesting. So let's get into our class. We're going to be looking at, for this unit, the past simple and comparing it with the past continuous and we're going to be able to talk in the past. So we need to look at the grammar of how do we structure our sentence? What do we do to the action word to make sure that we can make a sentence that's asking or talking about something that happened in the past? Now, in the past means like yesterday, last week, last weekend. So we need to know that we've got some rules, we've got to learn it, and that's what we're going to be doing. So we are in Unit 6, and it's called Past Lives, and we're going to be looking at a lot of past actions and talking about the past. So let's get into it. So we're on page 69, Past Lives. I can see there are two photos. So this photo in black and white and this photo. And the caption says past and present. So this photo in the black and white, it looks like the past photo. Maybe this boy and this girl are brothers and sisters. And this looks like it's a present photo. It's a photo now, taken recently. And maybe this is brother and sister again in the same house. It looks like that's the same house. They're eating the same ice cream in their hands. So past and present. That's the photograph. So one photo and another photo. So we can see that there is a connection between these two photos. Like I said, it looks like they're probably the same people. So maybe brothers and sisters. It looks like it's the same background, the same house, because I can see the window and I can see the door, the bricks. Yeah, I can see that there's some connection with this past photo and then with the present now photo. Okay, so let's listen to an audio, and it's going to let us know something about these photos. So let's listen. Let's see what is the connection and write it down.
Track 56, Unit 6, Opener. During the 1970s and 80s, Chris Porsche took lots of black and white photographs of local people in his city. 30 years later, Chris looked for the same people by putting the old photos on his website and in the newspaper. Donna and Stephen saw their photo from 1981, and they contacted Chris. It shows them as children in front of their old family house. They don't live in the house now, but they live in the same city. They returned to the street. Chris took the second photo in 2015.
Let's listen one more time.
Track 56, Unit 6, Opener. During the 1970s and 80s, Chris Porsche took lots of black and white photographs of local people in his city. 30 years later, Chris looked for the same people by putting the old photos on his website and in the newspaper. Donna and Stephen saw their photo from 1981, and they contacted Chris. It shows them as children in front of their old family house. They don't live in the house now, but they live in the same city. They returned to the street. Chris took the second photo in 2015.
Okay, so did we understand that this was a photographer who one day took a photo a long time ago, sometime in the 1960s, and he then put it up on a website to look for the same people that he took the photos of. And they responded. This woman and this man responded and said, yes, that is us in that photo. And yeah, did anyone understand anything more?
1917.
19, hey, Andres, hey, 19, yeah?
19 is the old house.
Yes, it was in their old family home. Yes. They are in front of that old home, but they don't live there anymore. So yeah, they don't live there anymore, but they've come back to the same location to take another photo 30 years later. Yes, their names are Donna and Stevens. Yes, good. You picked up some good information. Good. So now let's listen again and underline the correct options. So Chris, remember Chris is the photographer, the person taking the photo, took black and white photos in the good, so you already know, 70s and 80s. The first photo, then we can just write the answers. Good, I think you guys got the answers. So so the first answer is the 70s and 80s. So Chris took black and white photos in the 1970s and 80s. The first photo is from 1981. The second photo is from 2015. 2015. Okay, so I hope you heard those answers in there. So let's look now at talking about period of time. So let's listen to another audio. You're going to hear 1 to 5 different times in the world, different times. So the 1970s, what year is that? The end of the 18th century, what year is that? And so on. So let's listen and see if we can match them, and then I'll explain what they are.
Track 57. Unit 6 opener. 1. The 1970s. 1970 to 1979. 2. The end of the 18th century. 1789 to 1799. 3. The beginning of the 21st century. 2002. 4. The 60s. 1960 to 1969. 5. The 19th century. 1800 to 1899.
Let's listen one more time.
Track 57. Unit 6 opener. 1. the 1970s, 1970 to 1979. 2. The end of the 18th century, 1789 to 1799. 3. The beginning of the 21st century, 2002. 4. The 60s, 1960 to 1969. 5. The 19th century, 1800 to 1899.
Okay, let's look at the answers and then we'll talk about it after. So the 1970s is which year? The 1970s?
1789.
Yes, 1970 to 1979. So they've done the first one for us. The end of the 18th century is 1789 to 1799. The beginning of the 21st century, 2002. So that's how we say it, 2002. Yep. And the 60s, 1960 to 1969. Yep. And the 19th century, 1800s to 1899. Okay, so let's look at some rules about these centuries. So it'll be easier when you know how to explain what do these centuries mean. So we usually start the year 0 with the birth of Jesus Christ. So if that's 0, that's the birth of Jesus Christ. So when it comes to 1, so the first 100 years is called the first century. Then the second, from 200 to 299 will be the second century. But let's go forward a bit because it's going to take very long. The 18th century is this year. So you just got to remember it. It's like, that's how you remember it. The 1700s to the end of the 1700s, that's the 18th century. The 19th century, again, the 1800s to the 1899. The 20th century, 1900s to 1999. And where we are now in the 21st century, you would have heard that. We are in the 21st century, which is the year 2000 to 2099. So we still have a lot of years until we finish this century and then go on to the next. So all these centuries are 100 years. 100 years makes a century. So if we go back to the first one, the first century was from the year 0 to 99. That's the first century. So if I was to do the second century, that would be from 100 to 199. So you can see how it goes all the way up to where we are now, 2023. We are in the year 2023. That means we are in the 21st century. So I was born in the 20th century. Pretty much all of us are born in the 20th century. Maybe someone is born in the 21st century. Is anyone's birthday after the year 2000? No?
Born in 1994.
You're born 1994, so yeah, you're 20th century. Yeah. Okay, so we're all born in the 20th century. Yeah. So do we understand now how it works? A century is every 100 years. The first one, as I said, starts here, and it's the first 100 years after the birth of Jesus Christ. And then you keep continuing. Okay, so that's centuries. That's how we talk about the time of the year. So let's go back now to our book. And let's match these people and events with the periods of time. So the first photograph was when? Well, yeah, the first photo was in 1981. So that makes it in the 20th century. Yeah. Oh, sorry, this is the first photos in history. I think it's meant to be the first photos in history. So who would like to Google when was the first photograph ever taken in history? If we're looking at our textbook, yes, this first photo, the one in black and white, was in the 20th century. But when was the first photograph taken? 1981. That's this photo, yes. But the first photo in history.
Yeah.
Well, in history, it would be so the first photograph was taken in the early 1800s. Photography, yeah. First ever picture taken. 1827. The world's first permanent photograph was taken in 1827. What century is that? 1827. That's the 19th century. Can we see that the first photograph in 1827, in the year 1827, is in the 19th century? Yeah, so 19th century. Okay, good. Let's answer the second question. What about the what about the euro currency? When was the euro currency? In 2002, 1999. The euro was launched, that means when it first came out, 1999. But coins and banknotes were launched 2002. That's interesting, not that long ago. Introduced in 2002. The euro came into okay, so maybe 1999, 2002. We could say which century? Let's go with 2002, the 21st century. So the euro, 21st century. So did you see how, because we know the year, I'll put the year 2002. The first photograph, when was it? 87, I think. What number? No, do you remember the first photograph? What year? 1827. 1827. Okay, number 3. When was the first mobile phones? In 1973. So in the 19th century, we could say. Number 1. I would say the 20th century. So the first mobile phone came in the beginning of the 21st century. So 21st century also. The Beatles, that's a group that sing from the UK. When did they come? They came in the 60s. So we could say, yeah, the 60s. And the American Revolution, when did that happen? That happened at the end of the 18th century. So number 2, which is the end of the 18th century. So I got that number from here, the end of the 18th century. So A, the first photograph, is number 5. Maybe if I put the numbers, 5. The first euro, B, is number 1, the 1970s. The first mobile phones is 3. That was the beginning of the 21st century. The Beatles was number 4, the 60s. And then we had the last one, the American Revolution, number 2, the end of the 18th century. Okay, so I hope you got that. So then 5, 1, 3, 4, 2. And we talked about the centuries. Now we know how to talk about the centuries. Okay, let's go straight to the next page, which is looking at currency. So currency means like the money, and every country has different currency. Some countries share the same currency. Like in Australia, we have the Australian dollar. In America, they have the American dollar. In Canada, they have the Canadian dollar. So it's the same currency, the dollar, but just it's a bit different. The Australian, the American, and the Canadian dollar. Or, you know, some other one. So when we look at these currency notes, which people or places are on the coins or the notes in your country? Are they kings, queens, or presidents? So those that are Brazil, pick one note. I'll give you 2 minutes to pick one note, and then you're going to tell me what was on it. Was it a king, a queen, an animal? I don't know. A scientist, a musician, a writer, an artist, places, buildings. I mean, there's so many things. Colombians, pick one note and see and write about it, what's on it. And I'll tell you about an Australian one. So you do your own country. If you're from Brazil, do your own, pick one note. And then if you're from Colombia, one note, and I'll pick one as well and show you it. So I'll give you 5 minutes to do it. But as you're doing it, I will show you the Australian 50. Yes. Do you have? You have? Oh, perfect. I know. I thought maybe you have in your bag.
Here.
Yeah. I'm going to pick my own currency, the Australian currency. I'm going to pick the $50 Australian bill. Now we know when you flip it, one side has something and the other side has something else. So this is the Australian $50 note. I think you've all seen it. It's yellow, it's plastic. It used to be paper before. I remember when it was paper. On one side, we have this man, and on the other side, we have this woman. Now, I'm going to talk about this side of the Australian $50 note. So this man is a native Australian. So he's an Aboriginal man. And his name is David Yunapon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but his name is here. David Yunaipon. And so he is the first Australian Aboriginal author. He wrote books. He invented things. He's a public speaker, so he goes out and speaks, and he's a preacher. So he was a very important person for Australia, and they have put him on the Australian $50 note. And he's from the which year? Let me just see his name. So I want you to be able to tell me some information about your note, just like I've done the same for mine. So he was born in 1872. So that was very early Australia, and died 1967. So he died in the 1960s. So he was born, let's have a look at the years. He was born, I said, in the 1872. So he was born in the 19th century, and he died in the 20th century. So there you go. That's the $50 note. As I said, an important person for Australians. So they have put him on the $50 note. That's a good image here of him. Okay, Brazil. Who would like to come up and tell us about your notes? Clayton? Sorry, what's the note, first of all? 50, and what's the currency? How do I spell re? A? E? Okay, so tell us about this one. The Jaguar. This looks so cool. Tell us about this. This is the 50 reals, is that right? Which is in Brazil. So cool. The Jaguar? Tell us. So why do you think they picked the Jaguar? So you have to look a little bit of history. What's the history for this note? Why did they pick the Jaguar? I like the colors. It's like an orange, pink. Yeah. Okay, good. So it's a typical animal of Brazil. Yeah.
For example, 100 real is a percentage from fish.
Ah, yeah. See, a fish. Yeah, interesting. Animal. Yeah, animals.
Two reals?
Yeah.
Turtle.
That's so funny. I have to see the 2 real. A turtle.
I don't know.
But on the other side, a woman.
No.
Interesting. Okay, Colombia. Do you want to tell us? So make sure you can Google, look up a little bit of history, why one side has something and the other side has something. Jose, which one? How much? 20,000 pesos? This one? 50 pesos? 50,000 pesos. So this is in Colombia. Is that right?
Colombia.
So interesting how different Colombianas. Yeah, see, for Argentina, Colombia. Okay. Yeah. So tell us about this man on your $50,000 pesos. Who is this man? Why was he important to put him on the 50,000 pesos colombianos? Yeah. He's a writer. Yeah. Noble writer. Good. And on the other side, I think this one on the other side. What is it? Okay, the native aboriginals. Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, good. So we've seen the Australian, the Colombian pesos, and the Brazilian real. So you have an idea now how different countries, different. So Ronan says, hey, Ronan, the woman on the Brazilian reals note is Marianne. It is the name given to the sculpture by French soldiers at the time, mixing two popular names, Marie and Anne. The statue has since been seen as one of the main symbols of freedom by Republican movements. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Ronan. And that was the woman on the Brazilian real. Which note exactly? On every note. Wow. She's on every Brazilian real note. Is that right? Interesting. Okay, just some other ones I'll share with you. I know that in Colombia, the 2,000 pesos has an artist. Her name is Deborah Arango. Did you guys know that? In Korea, the 10,000 won has a king who served in the 14th century. So remember the 14th century, which is the years 1300 to 1399. So amazing to share that. Different countries, different. Okay, good. Let's look at the article. We're going to read an article and you can repeat after me so we can practice some pronunciation. So we have famous faces. Okay, George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. He was born in 1732 and lived during the American Revolution. He died in 1799, but his face wasn't on the US dollar until the 19th century. Now, his face is on the US $1 note, and it is famous around the world. On January the 1st, 2002, there was a new currency in Europe, the euro. The new notes were different from traditional money because there weren't any famous people on the notes. Instead, there were pictures of different types of buildings from different times and places across Europe. Frida Kahlo, sorry if I'm saying it wrong, painted and studied art when she was young. On August the 21st, 1929, she married the artist Diego Rivera, and they lived and worked in Mexico City. During the 1930s, they traveled around the world. Their paintings were famous in many countries. Today, Frida and Diego's faces are on the Mexican 500 peso note. Very interesting. And we just had an art gallery in South Australia for Frida and Kahlo. Did anyone go? Yeah, you went? Was it good? Yeah? Did you go this last weekend? Oh, 1 month ago. Yeah. It was a very long time. Good. So you enjoyed seeing the art gallery. Good. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next question. I'm going to let you now read the article again for yourself so that you could understand it properly and answer question 3. So you got 6 questions. Okay, so I'll give you, hey, Fernando, you're online today. Okay, so I'll give you 2 minutes to do question 3, answering the questions about the article that we just read. Okay, so we're looking at answering true or false to the questions about the article that we just read. So I hope you had time to read the article again and understand it. So it was famous faces. It was about the currency, the notes. Paragraph 1 was about the note of one of the notes in the United States of America. Number 2 on the Europe, and number 3, Frida Kahlo. So George Washington was an American president. Was that true or false? True. We read that. True. His face is on every $10 note. False. So I'll write some notes. Not notes, sorry. I'll put some answers here. So true, false. Euro notes have famous faces on them. False. Because if we look at this one, it had a building, structure. So Euro notes have famous faces on them. False. Some Euro notes have pictures of cities. True. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera were artists. True. Their faces are on different Mexican notes. False. It didn't say that. Pesos? Yeah, only on the 500 peso. And if we match paragraph 1, that goes with C. So we can see that this paragraph about George Washington is this note here. So that's C. The second paragraph about the euro is this one, B, exactly next to it. And the last paragraph about Frida Kahlo and Diego is A. So we can see an example of the currency note next to the paragraphs that we read. Okay, good. Let's look at the past, getting now into talking about the past. So if I go to the top of the page, was or were. So you know these words, was or were. So we use was or were. It comes from the verb to be. So we know we've looked at, I think in unit 1, the verb to be, but using it in the present. Am, is, are. Now we're looking at it in the past. So it comes, like I said, from the verb to be, and it depends on the subject. So you always have a subject first. Maybe it's I, maybe it's you, he, she, it, we, or they. So if it's I, then it would be was, I was, you were, he was, she was, it was, they were, we were. So you have to remember which of these words go with which subject. Now, when do we use it? We use the verb to be. You remember from unit 1 when we introduced ourselves and we talked about our jobs and how old we were and what we looked like. So it's the same. It's used to talk about our age. So not an action that I do, like I studied, I swam, I played. It's not talking about an action. It's using a subject to talk about the subject's age, their location, where they live, their job, or an adjective like, she was smart. Okay, so we're not using am, is, are because that's in the present. So it's the verb to be. To make a negative, we add not. So you can then connect it together with the was or the were to make it wasn't and weren't. That's how we pronounce it. Wasn't and weren't. Yep, so you just add not to make it a negative. So it's like saying, I was not a teacher. I wasn't a teacher. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't in Brazil. If we look at some examples from the textbook, so it says George Washington was, because we know we want to talk about his job. So George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. So I had to say was because he's not living anymore and he's not doing this action anymore. That's not his job right now. So subject, George Washington, he was, and I'm talking about his job, was the first president. His face wasn't on the US dollar. So we're using a negative. His face wasn't on the US dollar. The new notes were different from traditional money. They weren't, another negative, there weren't any famous people on the new euros. And to make a question, we either start with the 6 W's. You remember your what, when, where, why, who, and then you add the verb to be, was or were, and then the subject, and then the verb. So you have to remember that structure. So to make a question, when, so we're picking when was he born? So remember, was or were is not the main action. When you do want to add it with an action, it becomes the helper action. So when was he born? Because remember, we use was or were to talk about age, location, jobs, or to describe something.
Yes, and where?
Was or were. Were they famous? That's an adjective. Were they famous? So I'm asking if they were famous. So you can make the question with the 6 W's, or you can start the question with the verb to be, was or were, and then you add the subject plus whatever information. So you've got two ways to make a question. So these two ways to make a question. Okay, so very simple. The past simple, was or were, from the verb to be. Okay, so that's how we make two ways to make the questions. Okay, let's look at the grammar box, which we did before, but this time answer these questions. So are the sentences about the past or the present that we just read before? Past? Yep, so we can circle past. What is the infinitive form of the verbs in bold? So remember, the infinitive form means the verb that we haven't changed. So was or were, from what verb does it come from? The original, like means almost like the original form. So what is the original form of the verb was or were? To be. Yep, to be. So the first answer was past, and then to be. Which form do we use for you, they, we? Were, and which form do we use for I, she, it? Was. Okay, so that seems pretty simple. Yeah, it's called the past simple. It must be pretty simple. Okay, so we've got some time. Let's go to the next page. So choose the correct options to complete the text about Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of, well, she was the Queen of England. Okay, so I'll give you a moment to read it, and then we'll read it together with the correct answers. So read it and choose which to be, what was or were, you want to circle in your answers. Remember the rules about the subject. It depends on the subject, which one we choose. And if you want to make a negative, make sure it's a not added. And if it's a question, you know how to do the question. Okay, so I'll give you 2 minutes and we'll come back and read it together. Okay, so let's have a look at it together. So the famous face of Queen Elizabeth II is on many different notes. When she, yeah, because she, he, or it, when she was, so when she was a child, she was on the Canadian dollar. That was in 1936. By 1953, there were 9 countries, because that's the plural, there were 9 countries with her face on their notes. But surprisingly, the Queen's face wasn't, because she wasn't on the British pound note until 1960. For a long time, there Wasn't.
What?
There weren't. Sorry, it's plural. There weren't. I'm just testing you guys to see if you've got it right. There weren't any happy faces of the Queen on pound notes. But finally, in 2002, there was, because it's singular, there was a happy face on a Scottish £5 note. Okay, so I'll just go back a bit because I forgot to mention we also use was or were when we talk about nouns. So when we need to talk about age, location, job, or adjective, we add the subject. But when you need to add a noun, you can say there was, if it's a singular noun, like there was a book on the table. Where is it? There was some good news I wanted to tell you, but I forgot. Whatever. If it's plural, you say there were. There were many books on the table, but now they're all gone. There were many students. So that's how we do it. That's when we use was or were when we talk about a noun. So if it's plural, we use were. If it's singular, was. Okay, we can start on number 6. I'll put you into groups, and 2 groups. You're going to ask each other questions. One will be student A, the other will be student B. So let's do this exercise. I'll put you into groups and we'll come back and have a chat about it. Okay, so we are back. So let's continue. We're looking now at time expressions. So time expressions, they're words or phrases that are used before the subject and the verb. So you remember, we always know that when we start a sentence, we have a subject and then we have a verb, and we've been using the verb to be. So subject and a verb. That's what we just learned before, and the verb we were using to be. So for example, I was born in Australia. But now we are going to use time expressions in front of it. So remember, start with the time expression, which are just words or phrases before the subject and the verb. So what are time expressions? They're words like in a month, in a year, last weekend, last Sunday, last year, last month, in June, because remember it's in the past, in 2020, in the morning, on Sunday, on Christmas, on the weekend, last Wednesday, last century, last month, last year. So that's what time expressions are. So if we look at these sentences from A to K, let's see which one is the most old one to happen to the most recent. So what would you pick as your first one? So the most oldest one, was it yesterday? No, because when I was a child is a lot more far in the past. During the 19th century, the 60s, last Monday evening. So imagine a week ago from now, before the 18th century, in 1799, this morning, last March, on January the 1st, 2000, a week ago. So number them from 1 to 11. From 1 to 11, number them. So remember, starting with the phrase or the expression, the time expression that's more old to more recent. So I'll give you a moment to do that one. So remembering that time expressions, especially the past, because that's what we're looking at this unit, come before the subject and the verb. So just take notice of that. Okay, so the first one they've done it for us is before the 18th century. That's the most oldest time, number F, before the 18th century. What year is that? That's the years before the 1700s. That's the most oldest time of all these sentences, before the 18th century. So it means before the year 1700. What's number 2? What would be the most oldest time next to that? G? In 1799? Yeah. I would say G. Because before the 18th century, and then you're saying in the 18th century, because 1799 is in the 18th century. So G. The next one, C. During the 19th century, yes. So now we're moving. We went before the 18th century, and now the 19th century. C. During the 19th century. What comes after that in time? The 60s. Yep. Because that's in the 20th century. So somewhere in here. So we've moved to the 20th centuries, the 60s. That's number 4. So 4D. And 5. A. Yep. So it is A. When I was a child. So now you're born. Maybe we're talking about the 80s or the 90s for some people. When I was a child. Yep. So that comes next, number 5. What comes after that? The first, 2000? Yep. So now that I'm born, because I said when I was a child, this date comes after that. On January the 1st. Yep. J. After that, last March. So now we're talking about last year. Last March, 2022. Then K, a week ago. Now we're talking about a week ago. What comes after that? Last Monday evening. So a week ago and last Monday evening. I know because today is Monday, it's a bit strange, but it's we can say that this is first, a week ago, and then last Monday evening. After that, yesterday. And the most recent of the time of these sentences, this morning. That's right. So can you see how we moved from before the 18th century? I think we started with the sentence during, the first one was, sorry, before the 18th century. And you could see that we moved to the 19th century, to the 20th century, to the 21st century, to when I was, to last year, last week, last month, this morning. So that's how we use time expressions now with the subject and the verb. So it's not just saying I was, I was swimming, but it's saying yesterday I was swimming. It's sentences like that. So we're adding the time to our subject and our verb. In the past, we're just letting you know now when. We're adding the when. When? Was it when I was a child, last week, last year, this morning, 2 hours ago, last night, 2 weeks ago? So usually try and put that at the beginning of your sentence before the subject and the verb. Okay, good. Number 8, we're going to write was or were questions, making sentences with these. So we can see but you start the question with when, where, what, why, who. Let's make these into sentences and know that we need to add the verb to be. So was or were. Remember, was is for I was, he, she, it was. Were is for we were, they were, and you were. Okay, so let's make full sentences for 1 to 5, for number 8. Okay, so how would we make the first one into a question? When were. Yeah. When were, because it's plural, grandparents. You remember, you must make sure you know who the subject is. So they were. So when were your grandparents born? Number 2, when was your last holiday? So when was your last holiday? Number 3, where were? Yeah. Where were you on January the 1st this year? Where were? That's a tricky. It's got the very similar sounds. What month were you born? Because it's you were. What month were you born? So remember, because when you make a subject verb, like I was born in 1985, but when you make a question, you have to put the verb before the subject. So that's why we have the verb before the subject in questions. So when was I born is a different sentence to I was born in 1985. Now, and the last one, who were some famous people in the 20th century? Because it's plural, famous people, plural. Good. Okay, so all we had to remember was the subject verb, but when you make a question, you put the verb first. If I look back at the rules, we put the verb first and then the subject in a question. But when I make a normal sentence, I start with the subject. I was born in Australia. That question, was I born in Australia? Or where were you born? Okay, so that's the difference between making an affirmative sentence, that's the first one with the subject and verb, or making a question. We have to switch the subject and the verb. Okay, we have we have grammar to learn about the past simple. So when we look at the action, all we have to do is to talk about it in the past. So actions like sleep, play, write, read, speak, talk, that's just the infinitive. It means I haven't changed it. But when I put it in the past, all I have to do is just add an ed in the past simple. So all you do is you add an ed to the action. So subject, because we always start the sentence with the subject unless it's a question or so subject, or unless we're adding a time expression. So subject and verb. So now we just add an ed to the regular verbs. Regular verbs means that that's the rule, they add the ed. So for example, play is played, study is studied. So if it just ends in y, you add ied. That's the only difference. It's still irregular, but you just add an ied if the verb ends in a y, like study. Or if it ends in l, you just double the l and ed, like travel. So he traveled. Yesterday, he traveled to Europe. So easy. So we're just talking about the action in the past. So we add an ed. But be careful. When you have irregular, that means they break the rule. It's verbs like the verb to go in the past is went. The verb make is made. The verb see is saw. The verb teach is taught. The verb write is wrote. The verb buy is bought. And the verb take is took. So they're just irregular. They have their own rules, but they're still in the past simple. To make a negative, you add didn't to all of them. I didn't, you didn't, he didn't, she didn't, it didn't, we didn't, they didn't. And then the verb, but you do not add the ed because that's the rule. You're adding the didn't. You're already changing the didn't because did comes from the verb do. So we're already changing the helper verb. We don't need to change the main verb. So it's very important that you say, I didn't see my friend yesterday, not I didn't saw my friend yesterday, or I didn't speak to my friend. No, you say I didn't speak. So you do not add an ed. Okay, so let's look at some examples here. They worked in Mexico City. Yeah, so add ed to the verb. Simple. He lived in the 18th century. So subject, verb in the past simple. She studied art because it ends in a Y. We add IED. And they traveled to Europe. So because it ends in an L, double the L, ED. So let's look at the grammar box again. What do we usually add to regular verbs to make the past simple? What do we usually add to regular verbs to make the past simple? ED. Yeah, ED. What is different about the verb live, study, and travel? Well, what is different? The verb live takes a regular ed. The verb study, because it ends in a Y, we add IED. And the travel, because it ends in an L, we double the LED. That's what's different. So live, we just add a D because it ends in an E. So if it, I should add that one. If it ends in an E, you just add the D. Okay, and the regular, you add ED, but if the verb ends in an E, you just add D. If it ends in a Y, you add IED. If it ends in an L, you just double the L in ED. Okay, so that's number 9. Number 10, complete the sentences with past simple form of the verb. So remember the infinitive is in the bracket. The infinitive means I haven't changed the verb. Live, study, love, speak. I haven't changed it in the past, present, or future. But now we are going to take the infinitive verb and change it into the past simple. So let's do it together. Barack Obama. So remember this verb ends in an E. So all we have to do is add a D. So lived. Yeah, lived. So Barack Obama lived in the White House from 2009 to 2017. They studied English together at university. The artist George O'Keeffe painted, painted, yeah. The composer Arthur Honegger died. So it ends in an E, all we do is just add a D. He died in 1955. The astronaut Sally Ride traveled into space in 1983. Angela Merkel worked as a scientist before she was Chancellor of Germany. I finished university last year with a degree in arts. My parents started their business before I was born. So we can see all of these actions happened in the past. They're not happening now or in the future. They're finished, completed actions. It's not happening anymore. Barack Obama is not still living in the White House today. It's a finished, completed action in the past, and it told us when. So look out for those time expressions. Does it say the year? Does it say last week, last year? Okay, let's look at the pronunciation, because I noticed some of you were saying some of the pronouncing some of the words not right. So what do? If we have, I'll go with the rule first. So the rule is that we've got syllables. Syllable means like how many sounds does a word have? So for example, live only has one, like live. Paint. It's only like one sound, but a two-sound word would be like paint, ed, painted. Want, ed. It's like there's a stop. There's like a little, you can hear that there's like a stop in a sound. So want, ed, wanted. Traveled, traveled. So that has two syllables, which just means like the sounds. 3 is like visited. So it, ted, visited. It has 3 sounds. Viz, it, ted. So what are the rules? If it ends in an E and you add a D, then it's usually one sound. So you don't say livid. I heard someone say livid before. That's 2 sounds. Live, ed. That's not how you pronounce it, because the E is silent. Lived. So it becomes like that. Lived. Liked. Worked. So the E is silent. You cannot say live, ed. You cannot make 2 sounds. Live, ed. It's lived. So can you see the difference? If it ends in a T, then you split it up. You split up the words before the T and after the T, and it has 2 sounds. And if it has an I in it, then that's when the I has its own sound. Viz, it, ted. So let's listen to an audio and put the number 1, 2, or 3 to see how many sounds do you hear in the word. So remember I explained how to know the sound and the rules, how you know. So let's hear it now if you can tell. So put a 1, 2, or 3 next to these action words. How many sounds do you think they have? Okay, let's listen.
Track 59, Unit 6A. 1. Live. Lived. 2. Paint. Painted. 3. Like. Liked. 4. Want. Wanted. 5. Would. Would. 6. started. 7. Play. Play. 8. Visit. Visited. 9. Travel. Travel.
Let's listen one more time. And remember, not just, I'm glad to hear that some people were repeating the words. That's very good. But not just repeating, know if it's one sound, two sounds, or three sounds. Okay, so also repeat, which is fantastic, but make sure you understand how do you know if it's a one sound, two sound, or three sound. Try to recognize it. So one more time.
Track 59. Unit 6A. 1. Live. Lived. 2. Paint. Painted. 3. Loved. 4. Want. Wanted. 5. Work. Worked. 6. Start. Started. 7. Play. Played. 8. Visit. Visited. 9. Travel. Travel.
Okay, so we have, let's look at them together. So they did the first two for us. So live is only one sound, and lived, one sound. Paint, painted. Painted has two sound. Because you remember, if it ends in a T, then you separate the sound before the T to after the T. And if it ends in an E, remember that letter becomes silent. So painted, that's two sounds. You can see that I can stop. Painted. But live, I can't say live. I can't, I have to say live. It's one sound. See, it sounds funny if I stop. I have to say live. It's just one sound. But painted, I can have that two sound. Like. One. Yep. So put a one, like, because it ends in an E. The E becomes silent. So liked. So like, one sound, liked, one sound. Want. Want is one sound, but wanted, when it ends in a T, it actually, and it takes an ED, it becomes wanted, two sounds. Oh, I have it here. So wanted, because it ends in a T. Remember the rule? When you add the ED, it takes the two sounds if it ends in a T. Work, one sound, work. If you add the ED, worked, one sound, because the E becomes silent. Because it's not worked, it's worked. It's one sound, not work ed. No, it's worked. Start. Start is one sound. And started is two sound because it ends in a T. So start is two sound, started. So remember, we separate the sounds. TED has its own sound, started. And play is one sound, but played it's like worked, so it's one sound. Played. I don't say played. I say played. It's one sound. Visit. We know it's that verb that has an I in the middle. So it's one sound, visit. Sorry, two sound, visit. But in the ED, it's three sounds. Visited. The I has its own. So this is two sounds, visit, but the ED is three sounds. And travel is two sounds, travel. But in the ED form, it is two sounds, traveled. Okay, so now we know how to pronounce the endings to our action words in the past. So what are we going to do now? We're going to practice talking about someone in the past, but we're going to do it in a group and you're going to present it. So for example, you could talk, I'm going to put you in a groups of three. You could talk about Carla, how do I say her name? Frida Kahlo, or a president of your country, or a famous soccer player, or anyone. So you're going to write sentences about their life. So remember, when we try and use your ED, was or were, because you could talk about his family, or it could be someone in your family, but because you're doing it as a group, you want to know the person. So remember the rules, was or were. We use it to talk about the age, their location, their job, adjective. You can describe them, what they were like. They were quite smart. They were very intelligent. They were amazing. They were really passionate about something. They were the world's best soccer player, whatever. When they were born. So you can give us lots of information about someone's life, but you're doing it in a group and you're going to come up and present. So I'll put you into groups and we'll watch the presentations after. Okay, so we were talking about getting into groups and presenting someone that's famous. So we're going to be hearing Edward and Gustavo talk about a famous person. So make sure you can hear the past to be, was or were, and just information about this famous person that they are going to tell us about. So, okay, so
We are talking about items and items and was born in 1960.
it's 1960.
In 1960.
I'll put a photo. Yes. Yeah.
He died in 1994. He was driver of what? Right, right. The best.
He won 3 champion world. And he was from Mexico. He born. He was from Brazil. Sao Paulo. He won 18. How do you say victory? When the one position, he won 3 victories.
14 victories. 18. No, in the first or second or the position.
The podium.
Podium.
Yes.
The 5 seconds.
No more problem.
Yeah.
He crashed.
In the in San Marino. Yeah. San Marino Grand Prix.
36, more or less. 35.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. The World Formula One legend. He's a legend. So anyone else would like to share a famous person and tell us some information about him? No? Next group? I'll give you a few more minutes. Okay, so now we have Silvio and Clayton, who are going to tell us about Silvio Santos, a famous person. So let's listen.
Okay, Silvio Santos is a famous person in Brazil. When he was young, he was a street vendor. He sold pens on the street. Yeah, he worked at the Globo television station in Brazilian television.
This is all television station. Played
Television. Yeah. Novelas. Series. Some derivations. Yeah, like cartoons.
Television station owner Silvio Santos. So coming from a poor life to making being big in Brazil. So that's good. Okay, so who do we have next? What's the name?
Shakira.
Ah, yes. I think the whole world knows Shakira. So now we have Wilda and Jessica. They're going to tell us about the famous person that they chose. Who is Shakira? So let's listen and hear what we know about Shakira.
Yes. Yeah.
Shakira. She's a singer and singer writer in 1990.
In 1990,
At the age of 30, she recorded the first album.
Freedom's album?
Yeah.
Yes, in 1929. Yes. His first musical album when it was very barefoot. Barefoot. ¿Y descalzo? Name. The name of the descalzo.
Yes.
Barefoot.
Sem shoes.
She was born in the city of
Barranquilla. He was born in Barranquilla.
the album Yes Descalço reached #1 in 80 countries.
Yes. Around the world.
Shakira
He is
David
queen of the music.
On top.
Of
Yes.
music.
And she's still playing.
It's the top.
Yes. And
Yeah.
Billboard Latin Music Awards Album of the Year, Video of the Year for Estoy Aqui, and the Best New Artist. In how
Yeah, 201.
we released first album in English.
yes. And that's, yes, amazing. Her dancing is very amazing. Okay, last team. Who are we doing? Last, but not, we say last, but yeah, forgot the same. Who are we doing?
Together.
Who?
My famous is different and different.
Ah, okay. Who's your one?
Fernando Botero.
The big paintings. Yes, I know. Yes. Okay, interesting. So, Jose, tell us about this famous man, Fernando Botero.
He's born.
He was
He was born in 1932 in Colombia, in Medellin, city in Medellin. Fernando Botero painting the Mona Lisa painting. Yeah, he's very
Yes. So, no, obtained in one of these verbs is
Yeah.
common.
Liking and the like it, the Club Barcelona soccer.
He likes.
He like Barcelona Club soccer. Soccer
Yes. Barcelona soccer.
club. Fernando Botero living, live, live it,
Live.
lives there,
No.
lives there, no,
Lives.
live in Monaco. In Italian, very interesting already, you know. Fernando Botero traveled around the world.
Yes.
Fernando Botero worked in Spain, in USA, very many countries in Europe.
Yeah. I know.
Okay.
So that's amazing. Yeah.
Adelaide.
Adele.
Yes. The singer Adele. This one Adele.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So for it's
Famosa. Famous. She was
She was born in 1988 in London. Adelaide singer singer
the USA.
Adelaide traveled part of
Travel
she traveled.
to travel around the world.
Yes.
Okay, también saben.
Adelaide lives in New York.
She lives now. She lives in New York.
Adelaide started to sing in the street market very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's been many Grammys and one Oscar.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing it down. Okay, good. So that's all the time we had for hearing about famous people. Ronan says it's a shame Fernando Botero died on Friday. Really, this last Friday? Did you guys know Fernando Botero died on Friday?
Yeah.
Really, just recently, the last Friday. Wow. Was he how old? Oh, that's a good life. 92 years old? That's a good life. It's a shame. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that as well, Ronan. Okay, so that's all we had time for. So you could see we used a lot of so you picked people who were still living, so it was hard to use the past simple. But if we were talking about people who died, we would have said he was famous, he was a painter, he was a famous Formula One driver. But yes, so that famous people, we will continue going tomorrow, next lesson, still continuing with the past, lots of past. And yes, lots of past. So we'll see you all then to continue. Thank you guys. And thank you, Ronan, for being online. Vivi, thank you. I hope you're all well. See you, Vivi, soon. Ronan, see you, Jose, see you, Valeria. See you all tomorrow, guys. Bye.